Well, I want to welcome Cali to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
This is such a good topic because I have never covered sports anxiety before, and yet it's like such a common anxiety. So we're going to dive into this, and it's really like not in my wheelhouse, although I deal with anxiety. So you're a perfect person to come on and flesh this out for us. Before we dive in, can you tell people a little bit about you?
Absolutely. So I am Cali Werner. I work at McLean OCD Institute and I do family therapy, outpatient and adolescent therapy in our intensive or AIOP. And so we work with kids of, adolescents of all ages, and it's all virtual right now. And it was a neat way to do that once COVID started. But recently also started my PhD program with Baylor University and am a distance runner. I ran in the Olympic trials in 2020 and
Really?
am hoping to do it again. So we'll see this next time around. Yeah, it was such a cool experience. But then the last thing, my children's book, Anxious Annie, recently came out, and it's my personal story written through a child's eye.
I love it. I did not know that about you. I didn't do enough research. That's fascinating. So you're a
Thank you.
perfect person to talk about this because I'm sure you've had your own anxiety show up. What
For
was the
sure.
impetus of you writing Anxious Annie? I was going to ask you that at the end, but now I'm like really curious.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I actually started struggling with OCD from the age of 3 or 4, and the symptoms just kind of progressed over time. Of course, in times of stress, symptoms would wax and wane. But then when I got to college as a distance runner, was trying to compete to race and nationals, my symptoms completely exasperated. And I still hadn't been diagnosed. So I really had no idea what was going on, struggled a lot, luckily had a very loving support system by my side through most of this process, and didn't receive diagnosis until I was 21. Exposure response prevention changed my life, which is what got me to being a clinician myself, an advocate within the field. But I think looking back at my younger years of competing, there was this special component of just having love around me and people reminding me that like running wasn't my full identity, which is that first children's book that I wrote. And who knows, maybe later on, I'll do the teen version, which dives more into the OCD component, but this book itself just talks all about, there's more to you than just this one event or this, next race, next competition, and that you're loved despite your accomplishments or non-accomplishments. So.
Yeah, and it is a perfect book for kids who have anxiety performing in any capacity, because it's a good story that talks about performance anxiety or not getting perfectionism. Like I can see it really helping for a lot of different issues. So I do feel like a teen one is much needed. So
Yeah.
we'll have to stay tuned, write it, and come back on and we'll talk about that. Yeah.
No, noted.
Yeah. So let's talk about how anxiety and OCD, and we can talk about both, how they show up when people are, and we'll talk specifically about sports, but really, I mean, a parent can, or a person listening to this for themselves can replace that with any performance type of anxiety, whether it's creative arts or music, really just performing, you're performing athletically. So how does that show up typically?
So, in the athletic realm for athletes, there's a lot of different superstitious or ritualistic behaviors that they can engage in around the time of their sport. And a lot of the research shows that individuals with lower perception of control tend to have more superstitious behaviors. And also, individuals that are rated higher on an anxiety scale tend to find these superstitious behaviors less helpful. This was a research study that I just did on collegiate athletes with a sports psychologist friend of mine. And so these behaviors can look like, I'll use my personal example, tying and retying my shoe over and over before a race, because my mind physically could not handle, or mentally could not handle the capacity of thinking, well, what if you don't win? Or what does that mean? For some reason, my brain just couldn't handle it. So it would tie all this attention to these other things of tie your shoe over and over until it feels just right, or make sure you go touch the starting line 3 times. Make sure you didn't offend anybody that's in your family here watching the race. And so I would go down the starting line and say, I'm sorry to each family member for, in case I did something wrong at some point, with a little bit of scrupulosity sprinkled in there. Mm-hmm. And I think it depends on the athlete for sure, and the subtype of OCD or the perfectionism. I've seen a lot of athletes get stuck packing when they're going to some type of competition, trying to get their suitcase as tidy as possible. And a lot of the time, I really do believe that the fear is, if I don't do this, then my performance won't go well. It is the common theme, but you're right in the fact that it's not just athletics that this can happen in. It can also tie over into other realms of life. So if I wasn't in cross country or track season, for me, all this anxiety would pick up around a big test that I had. So I'd have to, reread the sentence over and over until it felt just right, or circle and then erase and then circle the response again. And adults can take this into the work world too, with big presentations or just new life events.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's the OCD component of athletics and the anxiety are somewhat different in a way, the way it shows up. And I feel like almost like anxiety, like sports is like prime for OCD to take advantage, because there are all these, like, I actually had a dad once say to me, so tell me what the difference is between OCD and someone who's playing baseball and they have their lucky hat or their lucky glove, or they have to wear their, I don't know, underwear, like this particular underwear, which is like accepted and promoted, really.
Right. And I love that question. It's probably one of my favorites. There is a difference. So there's athletes that might, wear this same pair of lucky socks before every time they go and compete. And it does give them this sense of confidence of like, these are my lucky socks and I believe in this and it's valued for them. But then there's those athletes with like the genetic component of OCD, where it's not just the lucky socks anymore. It's the lucky socks and the ponytail holder that you have to have, or and the door that you have to slam 4 times, and it just grows and exasperates. But I do think there is that component for some people, like these behaviors, if they are not excessive, meaning, DSM-5 says more than an hour out of your day, whether you're thinking about it mentally or engaging in these physical things, it wouldn't be harmful if it's just that one thing, but it's the preventative work that you have to do to make sure that that's not growing and getting bad, because then if you do have OCD, it can take over your life.
Yeah. And you're making a really good distinction, is that, if you have that genetic predisposition to OCD, somebody might be like, these lucky socks, they feel good, I wear them, whatever. If I, for some reason don't have them, I'm not going to stress about it or whatever. It's just kind of a tradition or a ritual, but not in the OCD way. But when you have OCD, and you have those themes that can pop up, it can be debilitating. So I can hear some people in my head saying, well, and they wouldn't call them compulsions, but like my lucky habits or my routine that makes me a really good athlete, it's under an hour a day, but it's compulsive. So how can someone tell the difference when it's pretty compulsive, but they have to do it, that every hour they have to do it once a day in order to feel like they're going to be a good athlete, whatever that may be?
Yeah, I would ask them specifically, like, if this were impossible, like if you could not do this today, would you still be able to go out there and enjoy your sport? Would you still be able to go out there confidently? And if the answer is no, then candidly, I think you have some work to do, right? This is something that's controlling you and you're not controlling it. So there's some more research on how we should, and there's not a lot on it, and so I can't speak to it too much, but how we should be moving away from superstitious behaviors and instead going towards pre-performance routines, which I can identify the difference is that pre-performance routines have some type of purpose. So for example, wearing your lucky socks do not have any purpose other than that superstitious belief that this is going to help me. But stretching in a certain way before a competition that loosens you up actually has a lot of benefit, right? And so that's a pre-performance routine. Another pre-performance routine could be eating a meal that sits well on your stomach the morning of competition. You wouldn't want to try something random and new, especially if you're a distance runner. You can feel those things a lot more. And so that also has a purpose versus tapping the starting line 4 or 5 times just to get that just right feeling. And so if you can tie that energy into something else that has more purpose, then there could be benefit in it.
Yeah. And I know there's one member of my community who, who has a child who's struggling. I think he's a runner and has to do a lot of compulsive things, but it can be construed as purposeful in the sense that, I'm going to work out and it's going to make me a better runner, or I'm going to do this and it's going to make me a better blah, blah, blah. But then you develop these compulsions around your workout and compulsions around how you do it and tie it to your success. And it seems like a slippery slope for a lot of athletes.
Yeah. I looked to the point of where there was a time I would have to make my mileage round out to an even number. And so someone could argue, well, instead of running 5.5 miles for your run that day, you ran 6. Isn't that a good thing? You did more mileage. And if you're looking at everything in the grand scheme, I would say, okay, the amount of times I had to round up to this next mileage, it could lead to a lot of things. It could lead to, for sure, burnout, right? Like the amount of extra energy it would always take to make sure that it's right, or I wanted to be done, but I couldn't, or I physically felt like I couldn't because something bad would happen if I didn't. But then overtraining can become a component that ties into OCD as well. And so maybe for the short term, it could benefit you to this small extent, but we know that OCD tends to grow with stress. And so it usually will only get worse. And so the pros and cons, it seems like that would be more of a con in the long term.
Yeah. And I think OCD is so sneaky because it'll be like, yeah, it'll just be like, you want to be a good runner, you better do this every day. Don't miss a day. You better do this, this, and this, and what it's doing is it's robbing, to me, it seems like it's robbing you of the thing that you're passionate and that you love. It's what OCD likes to do. It likes to take what you love and make it its own. And that's not fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I was at that point of diagnosis. I dreaded and resented running, and could not wait to be done with it because of the amount of compulsions that came with it. And then ERP gave me the freedom. And to this day, I still am so proud of the things that I can do before a big race that I wasn't able to do before, right? Maybe I offended that person. I'm still going to go run. And of course, I still have this little voice in the back of my head that says, Cali, but what if you not apologizing is going to negatively impact your race? What if you're thinking about it the whole time? But to be able to go out there and then compete is so empowering, to not give in to that OCD monster.
Yeah, I love that. You've made so much. I love it because I think, you have the expertise as an athlete and you have the expertise as a clinician, which is amazing to be able to talk to someone who gets it clinically, but also gets it as a person who is an athlete and who struggled with these things. Because I think sometimes people will say, well, it's rational, and OCD will use this rational aspect where, well, I'm not tapping things or I'm not doing things that are unrelated. And so it'll hide under that, I think, or it'll touch other things that are so far away from your performance that you think it's almost unrelated. Well, I have to eat this, and it doesn't even seem related, which can be a struggle.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples to give is someone that might have contamination OCD. They'll say, maybe I'll ask them to do an exposure where we put a piece of candy on the ground and then eat the candy. And their response is, well, that's gross. Anybody would think that's gross. And I'll say, yeah, absolutely. I think it's gross too, but what do you think the difference is? And they'll think about it, and I'll end up saying, well, the difference is that I definitely think it's gross, but me eating this piece of candy does not, because I don't struggle with contamination OCD, debilitate me or make me feel like something terrible is going to happen. Versus for you, this one exposure can give you back freedom in so many other aspects of life. Because if you can do this, like when you're ready on your hierarchy, of course, then you've unlocked that freedom, and it's not your OCD making the choice not to eat it. It's you, because it's just gross instead of something terrible is going to happen, or this is going to harm me in some type of way.
Yeah, I love that example. And you can even use that conversely, like if I'm going to, everybody who's an athlete works out. And so of course I'm going to work out, but your typical athlete, they can skip a day, if you said you have to skip a day and they're like, okay, I'll make it up tomorrow, or okay, I'll just do it tomorrow. But when it's OCD who's controlling it, there's panic and there's concern, and
Right.
there's that distress that shows up that wouldn't be just like you think, ew, yeah, it's gross, but like I'm going to put it in my mouth and then I'm not going to think about it tomorrow. And you're going to carry this the whole time because OCD is going to be really loud. So yeah, I like the distinction.
Yeah, I like the what you just said. You're going to be carrying it the whole time. It's more of an OCD thing. If you're worried about the fact that because you maybe felt sick today, you decided to skip practice, and if you're thinking about that a week later, then that is not a healthy response that an athlete would have that wasn't struggling with OCD.
Yeah. Okay, I want to pivot, and I want to talk about anxiety in sports because I think it's a little bit different. It's a lot a bit different, actually. And then I want to talk about different ways to work through these things. So definitely with OCD, ERP, exposure with response prevention. If you don't know what that is, I have episodes on it, or you can Google it, but you can go to the search button on my website and just type in ERP and you'll find it. But let's talk about anxiety, because I feel like these are cousins. I always say that, they're cousins, but they also are different. So how do you see anxiety showing up? Because anxious Annie is really not about OCD. It's about an anxious kid who's very worried about her performance. So can you talk about how anxiety shows up with sports?
Definitely. So we look at anxiety as more of this general worry. You can definitely have the what if thoughts with general anxiety of what if this happens or what if that happens, and it just kind of sends you into this plummeting rapid hole of worry. And when athletes are struggling with anxiety, a number of things, it look differently, right? So some athletes might have a really upset stomach, not to be able to eat anything before competition because they're just overly thinking about all these components that make them afraid. And I found actually there was a time in my life where a coach would promote picturing the layout of a race. I dreaded that day. It would be the day before race. We would all close our eyes and he would say, okay, at this point in the race, you're going to think of what you're going to do. You're going to lengthen your strides. You're going to pick it up here. But that completely exacerbated my symptoms because I would think of all of the negative what ifs if that were to happen. And so if these catastrophic thoughts are coming up for you around your competition, or remember, sometimes our brains say, nope, can't handle that. So these catastrophic thoughts will come up about something completely unrelated to your competition. That still has a huge impact on you and your ability to perform. And I think overall, just general anxiety can kind of exhaust you before you even have the time to compete. I don't know if anyone listening here has ever experienced this, but I hear this a lot of, well, I just worried and worried and worried so much that I had to go to sleep, right? Like completely
shut off.
Yeah. My fuel source is in the brain. And so I think that can happen a lot. Just over evaluating, over analyzing. And so getting in the present moment and thinking more about, okay, this competition is tomorrow and I've done everything I can for tomorrow, but right now I need to focus on what I need to do today. And today I know that I need to prepare my lunch. So I'm going to prepare my lunch. And I think the other tricky part with that is some athletes can and do prosper when it comes to picturing their competition the day before, or when a coach is hard on them and says, okay, make sure you think of all the plays tonight before you go to bed. Whereas other athletes need to respond to something differently. And like they have this internal drive already where they've already been doing that for a long time and they actually need to do the exact opposite. So that component of coaches knowing their athletes is also vital.
Yeah, it's a good point because they might be trying to do something that isn't really going to be fruitful for that athlete. So
right.
You're bringing up some really good things that I've heard a lot in my practice. Kids feeling nauseous and sick before they go, kids really liking a sport, but then, when it comes to game time or performing or the competitive aspect of it, they crumble. And so they love it because I am a big fan of parents not forcing their kids to do sports, when the kid doesn't love it. Because a lot of times I'll get questions like, Natasha, he he really, he feels sick before every basketball game, or she feels really nervous before she goes to dance. And she says she doesn't want to do it and she doesn't love it, but we told her she has to stick with it. And that's different. I feel like she's not loving it and it's really spiking her anxiety. How about just have her not do it? But a lot of the times the kids love it. They're good at it and they want to do it. But it's that component of feeling nauseous, throwing up, having a coach yell at them, having that firm voice. You're hitting on all the things I often hear with anxiety. So what can someone do when they want to do this sport, they love the sport, but their anxiety is really getting the best of them?
So sometimes I think there can be this like somatic component that they're afraid of, or just these feelings and sensations they're getting from the nerves. Like if a young athlete is about to go on the volleyball court and their legs are shaky and they almost have that jelly-like feeling because of how nervous they are, that feeling can completely terrify them, right? They can say, oh my gosh, I never want to feel that again. I don't want to go on the court anymore. And it only happens at games, so I only want to go to practice. And so if that athlete actually loves volleyball, then we would want to do some exposures around that of, passing a volleyball around or shaking our legs a whole bunch before we go out and then we pass the ball, and just little by little work up this hierarchy of teaching them that this is a feeling that you're having, but you can also continue to play despite that and play well. And then eventually they won't be as hyper focused on the feeling and more focused on the game and be able to love it again, hopefully, even the game, not just the practices. But exposure therapy is one component. Another component I think would be to I just find for a lot of these athletes, taking some of the pressure off of them to just remind them that, hey, you just go out there and do your best. And it's like the number one goal is to have fun. And I know it makes me sound like I'm a fan of like everybody wins a trophy kind of method. That's not the case at all. I just think we have to understand that some of these kiddos that are going out there and feeling this heightened anxiety are already wanting to do above and beyond, right? Like they're already wanting to go out there and drive. And so if you can remind them, hey, have fun. Kids that are wired in that way, or their brains are wired in that way, I don't think that means they're going to back down or to like not try their hardest. That's naturally ingrained in them.
Yeah. And I think sometimes coaches, even some parents, don't get that. They feel like, tough love or really like pushing people is going to be helpful. And like you had said, that can be very helpful for some people, but anxious people tend to be their own worst enemies, and they already have that internal dialogue. And so having that external pressure definitely can ramp up the anxiety. I like that you talked about too, about like feeling those jelly legs, or that, your heart racing, and doing exposure. So how can I get this feeling more often? And it doesn't even have to be like, I think at a game, it's like, I also feel that when I have to do this, then do that more often. So you can learn how to navigate through those feelings and accept them. Yep, I'm having jelly legs because this is what I do, and I'm still going to focus on the ball. So I like bringing that up.
Yeah, I'm having jelly legs and I still just made a 3-point shot on the basketball court when I was practicing. Wow, maybe I really, like, maybe it is okay. Maybe I can, just giving them that confidence to know that they can work through it is important.
Yeah, because then it, eventually goes away. But I think when you hyper focus on it, I know I do. Like with public speaking, it used to be a nightmare for me. I know it's a little ironic, but I remember one time I had I thought I was going to go and speak to 30 people, and I walked in and they're like, oh, it's in the ballroom. And I'm like, what? Why is it in the ballroom? And it was like the entire ballroom was filled with people, and they're like, oh, and she's next. And I remember like wanting to go to the back door, but then I realized I had signed in because I was legitimately going to leave. Like, I'm like, nope, not going to happen. And then I remembered I had signed in with the secretary. I'm like, oh my gosh, they'll know I'm here. And my legs were shaking and my throat got dry and my heart was racing. And I had to like, just in that moment be like, either you're going to throw up like on stage. And it was like it was like the entire school district of school counselors. Like, it was like, that's the audience I was talking to. So yeah. And I just accepted. I was like, yep, you have a dry mouth and you have like a stomach ache. And like, ironically, you're talking about this. Like that was the topic. And so, yeah, wow. I think sometimes
human.
I know I was human. I just used it. I was like, yeah, I'm feeling really nauseous right now. Like this is not my thing. But I think instead of fighting it.
Yeah, well, I have a similar story that happened recently. So there's this Christian running camp that I went to when I was in college. It's for distance collegiate athletes, and it's in Mammoth Lakes, California. So it's really great altitude training, and campers will go for a week to 2 weeks, and it's wonderful, beautiful place to run while they're also getting that component of altitude to help with their training. And ever since I graduated from college, I've been going up and being a camp counselor while I'm there. Actually got engaged there. It just near and dear to my heart place. And we all get so close so quickly. And so we become like a family. And this past summer at camp, one of the counselors that I just met this year, I said, you know, you're like a brother to me. We just like gotten close and we joke and we prank. And he said, well, yeah, you actually remind me of my sister back home. And I said, oh, how so? And he goes, well, you're very outspoken. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not outspoken. And I just was like listing all these reasons why I didn't think I was outspoken. But after he pointed that out, the rest of camp, anytime I would say something, I would just like my jaw would drop and I'd say, oh my gosh, you're right. I am outspoken. And so now I notice it all the time just because he pointed it out to me, but I am definitely 100% outspoken and I'm owning it now when I had no idea before.
Isn't that funny how like when someone highlights that, you know,
Yeah.
then we can really own it or we recognize it within ourselves. I love that. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, going back to our topic too, I feel like sometimes people can think I can't be like a pro athlete or I can't be this like amazing athlete and have anxiety or have OCD. You know, like me feeling having shaky legs and me feeling me throwing up before a game. It's weakness. And there's so much about like being weak in athletics. Like it's not okay. It's not accepted. And I wonder what the reframe can be for that too. You know, that you're feeling anxious.
Yeah. I mean, one, you make a really good point. So one of the research highlights is that athletes don't receive evidence-based care for a lot of different reasons because there's a lot of athletes that don't until it gets too bad. But one of them is this fear that they're not going to be perceived as resilient, or athletes. There is a lot of stigma around athletes being invincible or kind of celebritized. And so they feel like they can't turn to getting that help. And that's why I think it's so important doing things like what we're doing now, speaking out about it. And even the Olympics, a lot of press has come out about athletes talking about their mental health. And so we're just normalizing it now, to give them the opportunity to seek that mental health support and like reminding everyone else, no, a lot of these athletes that are really good, they are celebrities, but even celebrities are still human. Even celebrities still have their struggles.
Yeah.
And like the fact that they're working on it, that's what's brave, not the fact that there's nothing wrong at all, which is impossible.
Yeah, which is so normalizing. And I think in other areas, you know, you have musicians, you have a lot of actors coming out saying I have anxiety or I have OCD and starting to become more normal. You know, Child Mind Institute does like kind of their campaign where there's famous people talking, but you don't see too many athletes. Like it's almost like it was still taboo for athletes. So I think it is amazing to see, you know, in the Olympics that we're having people being vocal about that. Like they're the top of the top, the cream of the crop, and they are struggling, and that's what makes them resilient. It's the struggle, I think, that it builds that tenacity. Yeah.
And I love seeing that where the change is transforming to that, because it
Mhm.
definitely used to be that way. And we still have a long way to go with it. But yeah, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, we're making it's steady progress, and I love that you're doing research on this too. Like that's phenomenal because there's doesn't seem like there's a lot of research. I mean, I don't know, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of research on this
There
topic.
isn't. Yeah, there definitely is a gap in the research. And so that is my goal, to pour in and learn as much as I can about it.
It's such a crazy, like important topic, and it's not well explored. So we do need people who are like you, who are like that's their niche, and they're going to provide some research and some support that way.
Right.
So,
Well, and oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think some of the research is showing too that athletes are actually vulnerable. Like that of course, they're tough for a lot of different reasons when it comes to competition, but they're also vulnerable because they're balancing athletics in everyday life. They're balancing these stigmatizing reputations that they're supposed to uphold, and there's a lot of pressure on that. They're balancing trying to find time to, if they are in treatment, get treatment, the cost of treatment, unless you're the cream of the crop best athlete out there, you don't get fully financed for competition, and so there's a lot of other things that they're navigating through that make it really tough for them. And so of course, they're going to probably be struggling with anxiety, depression, which are two common things that come across with competitive elite level athletes.
Yeah. And knowing that that's normal, knowing that that does happen, that you're not alone is huge. So I have two questions. One is, so where can people go from here? And then I want to talk to you about parents. I have a couple of questions for parents as well who are raising kids like this. But if someone's listening to this and they're like, I struggle with this, where should I go next? What should I do? What would be your suggestion?
Yeah, if an individual is struggling with anxiety and competition, cognitive behavioral therapy absolutely can help get them in the right direction. So, going to IOCDF and looking at the website there, or even just educating themselves a little bit on their own symptoms so that they feel more confident to reach out to a local provider. And I think the other good component about it is that a lot of clinicians are meeting with people virtually now. And so if they are juggling a lot, if they're in college athletics, like I don't think that should be an excuse not to take care of your mental health. And so even speaking to the school counselor about clinicians and asking them if your symptoms are more towards this OCD component, or if you feel like you're just struggling with generalized anxiety, asking the clinician to find a CBT clinician for them. And of course, if it's OCD, CBT with exposure response prevention would be really important.
Yeah. And I think I was going to bring that up because I think, a lot of people who are like very serious, they'll go see a sports psychologist, and that's become a very big field, but I don't know. And I might be ignorant, but I would doubt that most sports psychologists would know ERP or how to spot OCD in the way that they should. And so I think that could be a slippery slope too, is if you are doing compulsive behavior, like Cali was talking about, like tapping or doing compulsions that are beyond anxiety, like just beyond the feeling of nervousness or beyond ruminating, you might want to be cautious about going to, I don't know, a sports psychologist.
You're right. Yeah. So my best friend is one of my best friends is a sports psychologist, and she competed in the Olympics in the steeplechase. And
Wow.
So she's got a lot of knowledge on athletic performance and the mental health game. But we can case conceptualize together and navigate through things, but she absolutely will refer out if it's a mental health struggle that she's noticing. And because she's a friend of mine and I am well-versed in the OCD world, she knows about OCD, but she would be the first one to say, like, if she didn't know me, that she would have no idea, because she specializes in something else and she's great at it, but hers is all based around performance strategies and performance enhancement. Whereas mental health clinicians would focus more on mental illness. And so, yeah, sports psychology for anxiety related disorders is not the route to take. And a good sports psychologist hopefully could point you in the right direction. But they're going to be working on performance enhancement. So you're spot on.
That's interesting. But you're actually saying something I didn't realize, because I was just more like, CBT is not ERP, and most CBT therapists don't do ERP. And so people get confused about that. But I would have actually thought that an anxious person who's anxious about sports should or could go to a sports psychologist. But it sounds like I didn't know that they only worked on like performance enhancement.
Well, I think, in mental toughness. So like if an athlete is struggling with motivation or things like that, then sports psychologist could definitely help. And maybe if an athlete is feeling like some type of anxiety due to lack of confidence, I think a sports psychologist could help with that too. But if they're experiencing symptoms of like true panic or an anxiety related disorder, that's when you would want to seek a mental health clinic.
Well, and that's a really good differentiation. So if you have OCD, for sure, you want to see an OCD specialist. That always trumps whatever theme or issue you're having, in my opinion. Like if you can find an OCD specialist who, I mean, you're like a rainbow unicorn because like, if someone has OCD and, to see you would be amazing. That you're not going to find Cali everywhere. Like that's just not going to happen, because it's hard to find an OCD therapist in and of itself, but to find one that maybe specializes in any kind of sports OCD type of relationship, it's slim to none. It's actually just probably none, 0.009%. But you do want to see someone who understands OCD. And I think if you have an anxiety disorder, like you're saying, you're having panic attacks and you're having stuff, then you're probably going to want to see someone who's really skilled at dealing with that too. So that's a good point. Okay. So treatment is an option. Getting to know themselves is an option. Anything else in that realm?
I also highly encourage support groups. It's really important to know that you're not alone. And so if you can find a local support group to tag into and really prove that to yourself, because we all know it and anyone can tell you that, but until you see yourself that there's other people walking on this journey with you, I think it can be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. So one last question before we wrap up. So for the parents that are listening, because this will go out on my YouTube channel too, so people will be listening directly for themselves. But I get this question a lot where they say, he really likes this activity, or he really likes this, or she really likes this, but she doesn't want to do it because of anxiety. How can a parent help their child with this?
Yeah, we run into it a lot. So if it is something that the child loves, but they find that it's really scary for them to be able to compete at this point. I think the reality of it is if there is an underlying anxiety disorder, then the next thing that they love, this anxiety could creep up again, right? And so then they'd avoid that next level of their life or the next, and I've seen it happen in young athletes that the family member will take them out of gymnastics, but then into singing lessons, and the same problem is happening again. And so if the kid can vocalize, no, this is something that I love, but it's not worth it for me if they can vocalize that in any shape or form, then it's important to get them into some type of exposure response prevention, I would say, to help them overcome this fear, or not really overcome, right? Like the fear, if you're diagnosed, is going to be there, but to be in control of it instead of the fear being in control over them. And sometimes, especially with the really young kiddos, they don't know, like they don't know why their stomach is hurting. They don't know why they're feeling as anxious as they are. And so a parent could ask them, well, do you want to do this? And their answer might be that they don't know. So I still think in those instances, it's important to, instead of immediately pulling them out of the sport, to give them some of those tools and some therapy so that they can work through that and see if this is something that they do want to invest in for the longer term. But there's also kids out there that parents are pushing them to do something because they see talent in the kid, and the kid just says, this is just not something that I love. And I think it's important to respect that as well.
I agree. I think you have to first assess, is this something my child really loves, that they love? Because you will hear parents say, but he's so good at it. And it's like, yeah, but this is kind of his journey. It's like his life. So, they're like, just wasted talent. And it's like, yeah, but it's not your life. So I do feel the struggle, but I think it's important for us to like give our kids that independence. But you're right. If it's an anxiety disorder or if it's OCD, it's packing its bag and it's following you for the next thing and the next thing. Avoidance is the food of anxiety and OCD. And so I like your example of, then you signed up for singing lessons and boom, same exact issue. So I think it's this like tightrope of, if you drag them to the game and you're like, you're going to run anyway, you're going to compete and you're going to do track. I think you might hit a wall, but can you come and sit down and can you watch and support your team, and like get into some therapy and like work on it would be really helpful.
Yeah. That gets us into the topic of flooding your child, right? If the child is at the point where they feel like they're going to throw up before a race and you say, oh no, we're going to race anyways. Well, I think remembering, okay, that's not what an OCD clinician would do with the child. They would slowly ease them back into this, because my fear is if you throw this kiddo to the wolves and say you're going to race and they're having like panic attacks, throwing up before, then they're probably going to be traumatized for the future of racing. Whereas a clinician would ease them back into it so that it was a more pleasant experience and that they probably have a better chance of liking the sport anyways, which brings me to one more thing I wanted to say about it, is that let's say a kid doesn't know if they like a sport or not, and they're just feeling a lot of anxiety around it. If they get treatment and they're feeling much better and confident, then they should be able to vocalize, I do like this sport and I don't like this, or I don't like this sport, because the anxiety is removed. But when the anxiety is so heightened, we lose insight. And not only do adults lose insight, kids do too. And so we have to help them bring that down so that they can see clearly and make the choice for themselves. And if the choice is that they don't want to do it and their anxiety is under control, then we're kind of back in that boat of let's let it be their choice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a good point, that you really don't have the clarity until you get that treatment or you work on it, whether you're working on it at home or you get the treatment and you reduce it. And then you can really tell what is genuinely something that you love or you don't love.
Absolutely.
So if you have an anxious little kid, Anxious Annie is so cute and so perfect. And it's so specific. I mean, I was like, when I was reading it, I got it on Kindle, so I don't have a hard copy to show you, but you have a hard copy. See, super cute. What age range would you say this is for?
I would say probably 3 to 6 age range, but the message is good for everyone overall.
Well, it's such a good message that when I was reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't she write one for older kids? I mean, it's perfect for little kids because you're not going to find a children's book that is so specific to those feelings that so many of our kids have. Like when my daughter was having a hard time with swim class, so not even athletics, but she would throw up, be in the bathroom. She was like 4 or 5 and could not, like, it took me a while to connect the dots, even though I do this for a living, because I thought she has celiac and stuff, but she didn't at the time. Well, she wasn't diagnosed. I'm going on a tangent, but I was just like, what is the deal? Why does she have like diarrhea every time we go to swim class? And it was performance anxiety. And if I had this book, I could have read that to her and she would have, it just is words to her feelings that's so important to connect those.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard when they're not able to vocalize what's going on, but when they do, it can give them something to say, oh yeah, this is that thing that's happening again. And give them a little bit more insight on how to handle it.
Yeah. So I would definitely recommend Anxious Annie for any kid who is dealing with anxiety. And even if they're not into sports, it's so appropriate for perfectionism or for, wanting to do your best and feeling so anxious and shutting down. And I mean, I think proactively, I made my kids read, I didn't make them, but we did a lot of bibliotherapy where we read lots of books on lots of different topics about how anxiety can show up so that they have a vocabulary and they have emotional intelligence to say, oh, I remember I read Anxious Annie and now I'm like 8 and I'm feeling that way and I can relate this, I can connect it. So yeah. I do feel like proactively, if my child had anxiety or even an anxious disposition, this is on my bookshelf to read and to normalize it before it even pops up.
Yeah. I love that. That's a really good way to put it. And yeah, Anxious Annie is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble online and Target online, and it's by Cali Werner.
And I will leave a link in the show notes, and so people can just click on it and find the book. So thanks for writing that, and thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, it was great. I'm really passionate about this stuff and could talk about it all day. So thank you for having me.